welcome to another episode of Momentos and Voices. Today I have a wonderful guest, Dr. Kenny Mittelstadt, a wonderful friend of mine and a wonderful functional medicine doctor. Thank you so much for being here, Dr. Kenny.
Thank you for having me. It's so wonderful to be here, and I'm just so excited about this project that you're undertaking to allow people to share their stories. That we need so much more of that in this world, just that connection. So very excited.
Thank you so much. So for those of you that don't know, Dr. Kenny and I have been friends since middle school.
Mm-hmm. We go way back.
And I think we've been in and out of each other's lives, but I think we've always been present in a way. Maybe not talk every day, but I think we always knew of each other, what we were doing, what we weren't doing. And so it's great to have you here, Dr. Kenny.
Thank you. It really is great to be here. And you're, spot on. I feel like, we have those handful of friends in our lives where you could just pick up at any time as if nothing happened, or as if no time passed. Yeah, exactly. So I just love that. Mm-hmm.
That's great. Well, I want to really dig deep into your life because I obviously know it very well. But I think you have a wonderful testimony of where you were and everything that you had to go through to get to where you are today. So I want to start by your childhood. I know you come from a big family. I met you, I think 7th grade is when I met you. Mm-hmm. But tell me a little bit about where you're from. How was it growing up in such a big family? And just tell me who Kenny is.
Yeah, definitely. So kind of the origin stories. So I grew up in a large family, as you said. I'm the second oldest of 6 kids and military family and background. So I would identify saying I'm from San Antonio because we were here in the San Antonio area the longest, but we did travel around the United States a little bit, especially when I was younger. Grew up in the suburbs of San Antonio for the most part. And then, I think the chapters of my life after that just kind of evolved very organically, very naturally. But yeah, I would consider this home,
And I knew you grew up in a military family. Mm-hmm. So did you all, how did you end up kind of making New Braunfels? Because I know that's where we grew up in your home.
Yeah, it was kind of the perfect storm of things in a way, because oftentimes in the military, you're moving around every 2 or 3 years. Yeah. And so it was very unusual for us to be in a single area. And it just has to do with where my dad was, his different positions and promotions and different roles that he was playing at the time, to my understanding. So, we moved around a lot in the San Antonio area. I kind of joke sometimes. I think the longest I was ever in a single house was 2.5 years when I was growing up. Yeah, even being here, since 2nd grade all the way through undergrad is when I was in San Antonio. And I know it's kind of crazy to think about. I moved probably 20 times in my life total.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a lot. Especially a lot for a little kid. I think, and you tell me if I'm wrong, but did that, do you think, have an impact in your stability, in your inner stability? Did you have anything going on with that when you were growing up?
Yeah, I think what it really did was, first of all, it made the 6 of us siblings very close, especially in our younger years. And, we were like a little unit. The Mittelstadts were kind of, they were viewed as the Mittelstadts, kind of this collective entity in a way. Right. So we were very close, and, sometimes we were at the same schools, and that was always a wonderful thing. But I'd say socially, it allowed me to kind of learn to adapt at an early age. I don't know if I perceived it as a huge struggle because it kind of just was my reality. And, humans and especially children are incredible at adapting. But looking back, I do think that sometimes it affects your ability to go deep with other people, especially in friendships. If you're only there for a year or 2 at a time, it's kind of harder to feel like you have that stability outside of your family unit. So
this is the Kenny I remember growing up. Mm-hmm. You were like the perfect Kenny. And I'm not kidding. It was like if Kenny tried out for football, he was a quarterback. If Kenny decided to be in band, he was always first chair. I think you even tried to play trombone once and you ended up being first chair. And we were all like, how? And you had the best grades and you were the nicest kid. And of course, you were good looking. And so us all little girls were like, oh, Kenny, you know?
Goodness, yeah.
But now that I'm an adult and I can really look back, I can't even imagine how much pressure that gave you, you know, no, because I think you knew that everybody had this perception of Kenny and he was perfect. And so I wondered, I don't think I've ever asked you this, how did that make you feel? Was it a lot of pressure?
Yeah, that's such a big one. I think anybody who struggles with perfectionism and, you know, usually it comes from a combination of external and internal pressures. So it was a lot. I think I look back on my childhood a bit, and I do think I grew up really young. You know, I think just part of being part of a big family. Sometimes you grow up pretty quickly, you know, or you know, you're in charge of a lot of things because there's just a lot of tasks happening at the house all the time and stuff. So, you know, no regrets in that regard. But I think, that pressure of perfectionism was a lot of things. It was an internal pressure. I think in a way it was also a smokescreen. I mean, it was kind of a way to protect myself and maybe the most vulnerable pieces of myself in childhood. And, you know, and there was a lot of pressure. I think just growing up in a very structured military family, you know, we both grew up Catholic, so there was a huge pressure from that society. And in a small town Texas, I think there were a lot of expectations, both internal and external, to just have your things together and in a line. So
because not only, like you said, it wasn't only military family, which has this view of like everything is pretty straightforward, regimented, structured, but also Catholic. And you and I were pretty strong Catholics back then. We did retreats together. I think we were directors of a retreat together. We would go every Wednesday, every Sunday. Which I don't know if you'll agree with me, but I'm thankful for those years. I'm thankful because it really gave me the values and the morals and the kind of the structure that has helped me now as an adult. How do you feel looking back at those years where we were, I mean, pretty religious, I would say?
Yeah, definitely. It was. I remember anchoring very hard into Catholicism. I mean, I was sometimes reading the catechism for fun. I mean, you know, I
remember that.
Yeah,
I remember that.
I was such an interesting child. But I think that was another way for me to feel like I had control of what was going on in my life. But I am equally grateful for the foundation. Something that, you know, I kind of think of sometimes is, you know, the word Catholic means universal. And kind of in my adult life now, I take that idea of universal and I like to apply the moral foundation that Catholicism gave me, but on a very universal level, which is, you know, I see that, you know, we as humans are so much more alike than we are different. And that's, I think morality transcends religion, you know, and so that's just something that I really love and lean into, and I am grateful for because it gave me the foundation that really stays with me today.
So after high school, well, your last year of high school, you didn't stay with us. You went to a different school. So we grew up in New Braunfels, and then you went to a different school. And then I remember you went to Texas Tech. How was that transition for you, especially since you were coming from such a close-knit family and then really going to college, which I'm sure a lot of people go through that. I'm one of them, to like freedom, and it's a whole new world. How did perfect Kenny deal with that?
Yeah. You know, it was such a surreal experience in a way, and maybe to back up only slightly is when we were in school together, middle school through high school, so 7th grade to my junior year in high school. Was the longest time I was ever in one school system.
Okay.
So I really had developed a great close-knit group of friends and, kind of a foundational support system, if you will, there.
Right.
And of course, a lot of that centered around, church and school activities and band especially. But I think that's where I first started understanding a little bit about my surroundings really helping me feel comfortable, having a good support system and all that jazz. I made the decision, we had a lot of conversations to move my senior year to Steele High School. And I had a really great opportunity to actually write music for the halftime show for the percussion ensemble.
Okay.
And at that time, I was really interested in things like music composition, and there were some opportunities in like anatomy and physiology department there too that I was really looking forward to. So it ended up working out. My internal dialogue was, keep the family together. I didn't want my brothers to go to a new school, and I probably could have been grandfathered in as a senior to Canyon, but I kind of rode that wave, which is just something I tended to do a lot of in my life, was just kind of, not having much of a grounding in what I truly wanted or needed. And that's where everything kind of shifted, of course, with that transition to undergrad. Yeah. So, it was the first time I was out of the house. It was pretty intimidating in some ways, but also I was ready for it in a way as well.
And I don't mean to interrupt you, but I do want to back up because I know that when we were in school together, your dad was deployed to South Korea. Mm-hmm. And I remember that being something huge for your family. And you, especially since you were the oldest male, how did that make you feel? Did you have that pressure of, now I'm the man of the house and I have to take care of my little siblings and my mom and my sister? Was that something that your dad maybe told you when he left and said, now you're in charge? Or was it something that you kind of made it yourself and said, now it's me? Yeah,
it's a kind of both. I mean, we did have a moment, I remember, and this was before things like some of the really high quality, easily accessible video chats and stuff like that. We were able to check in every now and again with like dial-up. I think it was AOL Instant Messenger at the time, and but there was a lot of pressure there, and I think it was a combination. Already the Mittelstadt kids, we kind of operated like a machine, so it's not like we were not used to it, but it did kind of take the let's keep it together to the next level, I think, at that time. Okay. So this was 8th grade into freshman year, so it's I look back and it's a blur in some ways, but also the themes were kind of keep moving forward, Right. And there was both that internal and external pressure driving that. I do remember, obviously missing my dad a lot, and there was even a moment where my mom and my sister, I don't know if you remember this, but I did start growing kind of a little bit of a mustache in middle school.
Of course.
Oh my gosh, the early phases there. But, and so my mom and sister taught me how to shave and stuff while my dad was away. And, just little moments like that.
Right. That kind of marked you.
Right, yeah. And, again, it wasn't something that we weren't used to. I mean, even as a very young child, my dad was on remote assignments a lot overseas. When we were stationed out in Delaware, but this was definitely the longest stretch at any one given amount of time. So,
and so then moving forward, that transition to undergrad, did you carry with you those pressures from when you were younger? Did you have maybe that Catholic guilt that we all carry with religion, with our religion specifically? Did you take those things with you, and was it kind of an explosion on undergrad, like, what do I do with all of these feelings? Now I'm free. Now I get to do different things on my own. Now I don't really have to check in. I mean, how did you handle that transition? Which I'm sure it's something that many people go through,
Yeah. I actually think that the same kind of control and structure kind of followed me into undergrad. So I would say I didn't really have a typical undergraduate experience. I was very involved with my classes and my schoolwork and the Catholic Student Association at Texas Tech at the beginning. But I was still very scared to kind of experience life. I think I still had this really deep sense of maybe perfectionism, but also kind of where morality tips the scale sometimes into mind control in a way for me, which was you can't experience anything fun in life. I also joke sometimes, but my first drink, for example, was on my 21st birthday with my parents. So, that's the level of kind of, self-control and internal dialogue to do the right thing and be good, quote
Which
unquote.
is what everybody should do. But.
Sure, right, exactly. Everyone be safe out there, yes. I think what did happen was it opened up the ability for me to start individuating and becoming myself, outside of the family unit or outside of small town New Braunfels, or, this kind of opportunity to really start going internal and figure myself out. So.
And what was going on in your internal dialogue at the time?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there were a lot of things. First of all, the pressure to figure out what you want to do with your life when you're 18, that's a big thing. I couldn't really decide between kind of the math science route or music, which is, where a lot of my heart in high school and stuff was. And I was also having a lot of identity things come to surface then. So I, at this time, started really battling with my sexuality and, battling because I think I was my own worst critic in the process of individuating with the foundation of both Catholicism and the military upbringing and all that. But I was grappling with kind of coming out and I had never had any exposure to really anybody in the queer community up until that moment at Texas Tech and getting away from the house. It's kind of like the entire world expanded all of a sudden, and the world of possibilities did for me too, but that was really scary. So.
Do you think you always knew though? Did you always have a feeling that you were gay?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think my earliest memories as early as like 4 and 5.
Wow.
Yeah. Just whether it was things as subtle as like wanting to play doctor with some of my boyfriends, in kindergarten and stuff, rather than with the girlfriends. And I always had a close bunch of girlfriends at every stage of life, so that was never anything new. And I think that's part of the pressure in a way too, because there was this, if we go back to like the perfect Kenny idea, I think, through middle school and high school, when a lot of kids are figuring their sexuality out just kind of normally, I was in such perfectionist kind of repression mode that this wasn't even something that could probably surface in my consciousness at the time. And it's really kind of crazy to think about that. But I think that's why I was perceived sometimes as the nicest guy and like blah, 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 blah. It's because I wasn't really, first of all, objectifying anyone. but on the other side of that, I wasn't really having the typical kind of, coming of age experience in middle school and high school. So.
Do you think, because, that in itself is hard. I think nowadays it's a little easier and thankfully we're not there 100%, but I think we're getting there where people are more open and it's more accepted and people understand it more. But back then it wasn't at all, especially in a Catholic family and a military family. So it's like you had it all. So do you think you were kind of hiding those feelings and just putting them away because you knew that, one, it was wrong, right? And because you didn't want to, with everything going on with your family, your dad being deployed, everything, it was probably something that you were like, let's hide that somewhere
just kind of stuff it away as much as possible. Yeah, I think there were definitely moments, even in middle school and high school, now that I kind of think about it, where I knew that I had some attraction, but it was that the knee jerk was, no, it's wrong. Go to confession, I think at that time too, kind of 18, 19 in the early, like, I don't know, discovery phase in a way, I was ready to become a priest. I thought it was my only option as a potentially gay man was, that was my only pathway in my future. And it was kind of that was a tough thing to grapple with, was like just all of it at the same time, not feeling like I could be myself, not really even knowing what that looked like, because again, I didn't have any examples growing up.
Right.
There weren't characters on TV that were in my home either that showed any semblance of this idea that you could be gay and live a happy, healthy life, and that's actually a big moment that shifted for me. Was one of my friends, actually in the Catholic Student Association, kind of proposed this idea to me, was, well, why don't you, act on it? Or why don't you, have a family? And this was kind of the, excuse me, the first time I had even heard of this possibility. So I know it sounds crazy, but I think that's a really great testament to all the kids and even adults that have grown up in small towns. Like, I think you don't know how to approach some of these things that we are afraid of as a society until you experience them firsthand. And I think that's a very profound opportunity to share and connect with people, because the minute I started exploring the possibility or meeting other gay people is when I fully understood that we're all human. Like, this is it's such a non-issue that we make it such an issue, but it's usually because of a lack of experience and exposure and, connected moments with these other humans. So. Mm-hmm.
And so at that point, did you fully come out, or was it like, oh, never thought about this, let me start exploring it little by little? How was that process?
So I kind of had two coming outs, I say.
Yeah.
And, there was, at this time, especially when this was all coming at the same time, it was very hard for me to handle. I think in a way my consciousness was expanding, and it challenged a lot of my core beliefs and what had been instilled in me as a kid and young adult.
Right.
And so I actually had a lot of trouble with that. I would say at the time it probably threw me into a clinical depression. However, I was misdiagnosed with bipolar disorder.
Wow.
And medicated, and it was a really challenging time. This was this was after the first semester at Texas Tech and into the second semester, when I was really going through the thick of this. And so that caused a lot of challenges, I think, to my health. I think simply being medicated for bipolar when I wasn't
Yeah, you didn't need it.
Was maybe driving a lot of symptoms that some of my peers saw as alarming, and it was very challenging. It was, to say the least. Something about bipolar and mental health diagnoses, I think in general, is it really does take data points, being observed by a healthcare professional sometimes over a period of time to really understand, and to dive into the person's life that is actually presenting with symptoms that, I may have filled out the questionnaire that's like 10 questions for bipolar disorder properly.
And right after that, they medicated you.
Yeah, there was no follow-up in that regard, or it wasn't great. And bipolar disorder is one of the most misdiagnosed conditions in the mental health world. So that's something to really just, public service announcement, if you will, around it.
Sure.
But I think more importantly is if somebody really took the time to say, what are you going through and how can we support you? It would have been a very different situation.
I do remember, I don't know if it was at Christmas break or spring break, we saw each other, and I have this very vivid memory of us sitting in your car and you telling me that you had thought you were gay and that you ended up realizing that you weren't, and that instead you were bipolar, and that you had been diagnosed bipolar, and that you were feeling better, but that you had gone through a hard time. And now looking back, I don't know why I didn't react, and I am so sorry for that.
No, thank you,
but I think I do remember that conversation. And so how did that shift happen, and what happened during that process of you going through this misdiagnosed, or this diagnosis?
God, that's so crazy that you have that vivid memory. I just think that's amazing, because a lot of this period of time for me was kind of a blackout moment. I think from the stress alone to just, probably being medicated when I shouldn't have been. But in that moment, I think you caught me at that time that I was, I obviously felt safe enough to come to you and talk about it. But I think also then saying, I thought I might be gay, but really it's just bipolar. That was me going right back in the closet, I think, because I was very afraid, I was pulled from my second semester at Texas Tech after my parents got a call from one of the guys that was in the Catholic Student Association that I had some romantic feelings for, and I think he saw what I was going through, and he couldn't reciprocate them, and just saw how overwhelmed I was. So he ended up calling my parents. They flew up, and eventually I was taken back to San Antonio. And at that time, I was committed to a outpatient clinic in San Antonio to help figure everything out. So it was like intensive therapy. It was actually weaning me off of the bipolar medication.
Was it outpatient or inpatient?
It was a combination.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So it was kind of a staged experience. And so, but I think, that moment that we had represents perfectly exactly what happened there. Is I still couldn't grapple with the idea or feel like I had the support system to really come out and explore that, especially coming back to my hometown and the stomping grounds and being and living at home and stuff. So, it was a very, very strange time.
And so your parents were the ones that decided to put you into this outpatient clinic. It was inpatient outpatient clinic, and so during that moment, what was going on through your head? Were you scared? Did you know deep inside of you that there's nothing wrong with me, I'm just gay?
I don't know if I conceptualized it that simply yet. As this unfolded and I was experiencing it real time, I don't know if it's a certain level of, ignorance that I grew up with just because of my upbringing that I could even be gay, even though it was told to me and it was an option on the table, blah, blah, blah. I don't think I still could root in myself enough. I think I was still thinking, almost as a collective unit or on the greater good. I still had this vision of either I was going to have a white picket fence with a wife and kids and a dog, or I'm going to go become a priest. There really wasn't this in between, and that maybe goes back to the perfectionism too, and the pressure that I had put on myself throughout the process. But I think at this time the seed had been planted, though. It was there. I had experienced a little bit of life outside of the unit, and so this was really about, I think, the healing and kind of a little bit of a reset too. Getting off the medication. And I actually transitioned to Texas Lutheran University that next time, or for the next year or semester, and we can talk about that in a minute too.
So after the outpatient clinic, after you went through that process, that's when you started at TLU, and I know because I know you, that was life changing for you, and that's where you really decided who you truly were.
Texas Lutheran, and my time there was really, for lack of a better word, a godsend for me, I think, and the most authentic me. First of all, just the community there between the professors, my classmates, the administration. I mean, just an incredible college and organization to have been a part of, you know, and then music as well. So, you know, interestingly, this going back into the closet kind of situation was then accompanied by me getting into the music performance program. And so I just dove right into my percussion studies at Texas Lutheran University, which again was really a lifesaver for me at this time. I feel like creative energy and art and music for me was a way that I could start to grapple with all of the feelings that I really was experiencing on the inside. You know, music is so expressive, and I think especially my world in performance was great. When I was at Texas Tech, I was able to be a music education major, even though I went the exercise and sports science route beginning. But it was music performance that was just like, it fed my soul in a very different way. And so I was able to root into and stay very focused. I think that first year at Texas Lutheran, I made some friends, you know, I was part of the band and stuff like that, but nothing else really surfaced in the sexuality department for a while. It was kind of the same situation, business as usual, if you will, right, at the home base. And I was living at home at the time.
Home, okay.
Mm-hmm. And so, you know,
it was like right back to where you had come from.
Oh yeah, I was perfect little Kenny again, if you will. So, yeah, you know, and that first year and a half or so was really that business as usual. I was still going to church regularly with the family, really into my studies. I kind of joke a lot too, but you know, had my first girlfriend in my adult life at Texas Lutheran, and you know, we ended up coming out to each other, which is kind of the end of the story, which is so great. But I would say that time, that freedom, even though I was living at home, I was truly connecting with some deeper parts of myself and my joy. And I think joy is such an incredible driver for health and healing, both physically and mentally, when we're trying to process hard things. And I was surrounded by that at Texas Lutheran University. My circle of friends was just incredible. You know, and I think that last relationship that I had, I mean, one of the most profound memories I have is us lying on the trampoline in my parents' backyard and just talking about life. We were staring up at the stars, and, you know, I was that's where I first started telling her a little bit about my struggles with sexuality. Okay. And it wasn't an issue to her, even though we were technically dating. I mean, we maybe held hands a couple times. Like, you know, I was that nice kind of moral boy, but no, it's just that I was grappling a lot with what was going on inside. So, and there were other moments too where I just felt welcomed. I felt a lot safer to start approaching this with my wider friend group. So, you know, different moments. I did live on campus my last year before moving out with my family, or out of my family's house, and there were even moments where we were like jamming in my, you know, dorm bedroom and with a couple of the percussion crew, and the question was posed about me and my sexuality, but it was a comfortable question. It was just like, this is open, safe space, all that.
Being open with them.
Mm-hmm. And so, you know, the community there really supported my best self to start coming out. And, you know, shout out to not only my friends, but also my professors and some of the administration. I mean, some of the most influential people in my life at this time that really just made me feel welcome and inspired were, you know, I shout out to Beth Bronk and Doug Boyer and Adam Bedell, Sam Ehrlich, and I mean, the list goes on. They were just everywhere at TLU. So.
And this is when you decided it was time?
Yeah, so it did. It came out the first friend that I told, this was my junior year in undergrad. So a lot of time
to go.
So
3 years after your first coming out experience.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. So it was, oh my goodness. It was still one of the scariest times in my life, despite having this community formed, you know, because I think for closeted queer kids in general, and I use queer as kind of an umbrella term for anybody in the LGBTQ plus community, is when your environment doesn't support you, you know, whether that's family or community, sometimes we really take on that pressure, you know, and I think too, just like when we were talking about my personality, the perfectionism and keeping everything together and not rocking the boat and all of this, I was more afraid of that than more afraid of not being able to live my life authentically. It's kind of crazy sometimes to think about that way. But I remember I was in the car driving back from San Diego with my best friend, Sharia, and she was the first person that I opened up to on that car ride. And we were just jamming, you know, the whole way. We were listening to all of our favorite music and John Mayer and Whitney Houston and all the fun stuff. And, you know, it was a safe space. And I knew it was. She was such a great and loving soul on campus. She's actually a Lutheran pastor now and just has the most incredible message of love and inclusivity with her congregations and in her life, you know. So I felt safe and, you know, open arms. It was a non-issue. You know, over the few weeks when we had returned back from that road trip back to TLU, you know, I opened up to several of the other people in our friend group. I remember we went to a coffee shop in Seguin, and I told, or not Seguin, in San Marcos, and told 3 or 4 of my other girlfriends, and again, non-issue. And that was the beginning of, you know, me starting to align with this core part of myself. So.
And here comes the hard part.
Exactly.
You know what I'm going to ask. When did you tell your family, and how did that go?
Yeah. So I didn't actually tell my parents, but I did come out to my sister, my older sister, and it didn't go super well. I mean, it did with her, but again, to rewind a little bit, and knowing myself and knowing my sister too, we were still kind of a beehive. We were, you know, very hive mentality, and so it got back to my parents that I had come out to her, and the reaction was not great. So, you know, it was definitely the hardest time in my life, the most emotionally tumultuous. You know, my entire kind of view of the world and love and unconditional love in particular was kind of turned upside down, you know. And so my coming out experience was pretty rough. I mean, after it had gotten back to my parents, they had staged an intervention at my grandparents' house.
Who are also very religious.
Yeah, very religious. You know, if I think of, you know, if we think of the concept a little bit of generational trauma in a way, definitely my mom's side of the family, and there's a lot to unravel there in terms of acceptance and love and just kind of moving through life without judgment of other people and maybe the fear that's behind some of that. So, but yeah, I mean, again, kind of a blackout period in my life a little bit, but, you know, it was a very almost Hollywood nightmare version of coming out, you know.
How did that intervention go? What did your parents say, your grandparents? Was it just them? Were your siblings involved?
Yeah, interesting. It was my grandparents doing most of the talking. And I think in a way that was my mom, you know, kind of not knowing how to deal with it herself. And so rather than doing so, going into her family dynamic to try
Which is
and
what she
communicate.
knew.
Right. It was kind of comfortable, you know, for her, but, you know, she's got her own stuff, you know, with her family to as well, I'd say. But, you know, I think it's It was tough because my grandparents definitely had the weight of, I don't know, they set the kind of moral stage, I think, for the family in a lot of ways. And bringing in the extended family is usually a bad sign if they're in on things as intimate as, family details and the immediate family and things like sexuality. So, but yeah, I mean, I was sat in a stool and just berated, be a man, you're not gay, you're an abomination, all of the classic misquoted Bible things that you could often imagine. Yeah. And so I remember walking out of that experience and, I think my parents expected me to drive home in the car with them, and I just kind of kept walking. I think I did eventually, but it was very hard, and then at that point, the support was withdrawn essentially. So, I wasn't able to live at home. I didn't have co-signers on my student loans for the last year of school. It was very challenging, I was kind of just thrown to the wolves, but luckily I had that community at Texas Lutheran to just be there. I mean, and lift me up in kind of the most profound ways. I've never seen a community, I'm gonna tear up a little bit, but I've never seen a community come together like that for something as human as this, and I look back on all these moments and I can make sense of them. I think there's a lot of this fear-driven dialogue around the queer community. I think we're seeing a huge wave of that in like the anti-trans legislation that's coming out, and I've done some advocacy work for that recently. But it's so sad to see the way the pendulum swings sometimes, and you get it. Different variations in different communities. If I did tell, I've told my story to friends in all stages of life and in grad school and stuff like that. And they're like, I can't believe that happened. That would never happen, here in my community in Southern California or whatever. And just understand that the spectrum of experiences is still out there.
Right.
I came out when I was 22, which is kind of late, I'd say in the grand scheme of things. But there's the full spectrum of human experiences out there with this process. So,
and I think it's important to say too, it's not an excuse for your parents or your grandparents, but I also think it's important to explore the fact that that's what they knew.
Right.
That's how they knew to handle things. That's what they were taught.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think their response came out of love for you.
Right.
It came out of, this is what we know, and they were probably worried about what you were going to go through.
Yeah, I feel like there is always that, I say it this way, we are a sum of our life experiences. So if our life experiences have never included dialogue with somebody who's different from you, and you can, we could make this a race conversation, a sexuality conversation, anything, that it's really hard to approach those like things that are new when our community and our surroundings support us not challenging our current understanding of our realities, where some of our experiences. So in a way, I think you're spot on. It's what they knew. And part of, I think, our duty as humans on this planet, in a way, is to share our experiences exactly like we're doing now, so that we can start to maybe understand and empathize a little bit better.
Right.
Because, what one person goes through is dramatically different, even in the same family unit, than another person. And I look at my family's the perfect example. All 6 of us kids, as we've grown up, become adults and individuated in our own ways, are so uniquely different. So honoring that on a wider scale, I think, is really a pathway to peace in these regards, and to not just tolerance. I think that's the bare minimum, but acceptance and support. So
and respect. Mm-hmm. I think respect is a big thing too.
Yeah, respect is huge. I think when we respect ourselves too very deeply, it's easier to respect other people because we're not challenging parts of ourselves that I think are the knee-jerk reactions to fear or something new or something I haven't experienced before. So.
And so, Kenny, after that whole traumatic experience, which, by the way, I'm so sorry that you had to go through that. I'm so glad that you did have that community, though. And I'm so thankful to them. I don't know them, but shout out to them big time.
Me too.
After that, what happened? And I want to get to where you're at now because obviously it's been a journey.
Quite a journey.
But after grad school, after undergrad, you decided to go to grad school.
Right.
At this point, how was your relationship with your parents, and at what point did y'all have a relationship again? Because I'm assuming it took a while.
Yeah. We. So, after the coming out experience, my friend Sharia and her mom actually arranged for me to be able to stay with her. And so, it was kind of, I finished out my last year at Texas Lutheran, had my senior recital, I was really living very happy ultimately. I mean, there was that deep, deep pain of that family experience, but it was about a year until I reconnected with my parents. There were sometimes messages that would come through the siblings that were supportive because I did go to school with my younger brothers. But the first time I reconnected with my parents, I was with my, at the time, boyfriend.
Okay,
and so we met them at Chester's Hamburgers off Pat Booker Road.
Dun, dun, dun.
I know, and it was a tough time, but they had expressed that they were open to meeting him and learning, about it. So that really opened the door for communication and some healing and repair to begin. I think it's an ongoing process. I think there's such an interesting thing that happens when, we become adults ourselves, and we have, and our adult parents have adult children, and so the dynamic naturally changes, I think, for a lot of people. Right. But yeah, we got to kind of create what the next version of our relationship looked like, and it continues today. We're in touch. They're very supportive of everything, and of my transition most recently back out here to Texas from California after my schooling and early years of practice.
And I would say shout out to them too, because I'm sure they had to go through their own process. And I mean, I don't know what they did, if they went to therapy, went and talked to somebody, but I think it says a lot about them, and it comes back to that unconditional love, even though you didn't feel it at the time. For you to be able to have that support now, and for you to be able to have that relationship, I'm assuming you both probably have different views about life, and they're still probably very in touch with their religious selves. But now, with the time and with the maturity and the therapy or whatever it was that y'all both went through, you can have that adult relationship, and maybe you don't agree with the way you see life and with the way you see things, but you respect each other, and I think that's huge. And again, I think it's a huge thing for them too. I think it's important to be said, because it's different generations, and it's not always easy for people to get to this point.
Right.
I mean, there's so many stories out there where they completely just forget about each other, pretend they didn't even exist.
Yeah.
Just terrible, because at the end of the day, it is family.
Yeah.
You are part of them.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's such a, all of that and what you just said is so important, because, first of all, I guess it's been almost 13 years now since I came out, which is just crazy to think about. But
we're getting old.
I know. It's time's up flying. No, my family, my parents have come such a long way. Yeah. And, I am very grateful for that. And I think it speaks to anyone can do it. Anyone can change their mind. And, whether that's an apology or whether that's just operating not in business as usual anymore and incorporating it, it doesn't take that much more effort to love everybody. I mean, there's enough love to go around, is kind of what I like to say and feel. my dad's extended family was particularly supportive of the journey as well, of them, I'm sure, but of me too. And, again, they have different life experiences than my mom's side of the family did with this stuff. So, but yeah, parents have come a long way, and I am very grateful for that. And I think, that's just something to highlight. There is that range of experiences in this space. I have friends that have experienced the full spectrum of still not speaking to family to openly accepting and didn't even have to come out. So, and I think that's such a beautiful thing.
And shout out to you too, Kenny, because I mean, in another experience, or somebody else would have just been like, you treated me this way, you pretty much cussed me out, and I don't ever want to hear from you again. And so shout out to you for understanding their process and understanding what they went through, and being mature enough to know that it came out of a place of love, even though love may not have been the way that's not the kind of love that you were looking for. But it takes a lot from you too to get to that point of not having that resentment and really understanding that they just were looking out for you.
It takes a lot to process those kinds of things. I mean, I went through years of therapy myself along the way, and really leaned on, my chosen family. Chosen family is kind of a phrase in the queer space oftentimes for the family that we do create, in our friends or in our extended family or community widely. And so I think that's such an important point too, is that community is such a important piece of the puzzle for healing. Right. There's no doubt in my mind that as I was healing this part of me and starting to become more in line with my authentic self, that it really helped to propel me into the next chapter in life too, which was, in the health sciences.
So. And so tell me about that. So after undergrad, you decided to go to grad school. You moved to California. What happened there, and why did you decide to do that?
Yeah, so at the time, gay marriage was only legal in a few states. So I wanted to live in a state that, was supportive. And California was one of them. But I had always, again, been interested in the math science world. The best advice I got actually from a counselor while I was at Texas Tech my freshman year was, because I was missing music so much, they said, go get your music degree, but get your prereqs for any kind of health sciences or med school you'd ever want to go to. Enjoy your undergrad so that you can kind of prepare for what grad school is going to bring, basically. And that's exactly what I did. Best advice ever, because I got to experience that incredible undergrad experience. Did some prereqs at San Antonio College, and then when I was cross-referencing schools, I was looking for programs that offered exactly what I was looking for. Okay. So it was kind of a no-brainer, but I shadowed a few docs in the area, different degrees, so MDs, DOs, DCs, and ultimately my favorite experience to observe was with my family chiropractor, who did a soft tissue technique called a ROSTI.
Oh, that's right.
And then and also the family naturopath. So that got me interested in going the chiropractic and acupuncture route.
Okay.
So I was cross-referencing schools, and it was between, it was between two schools, one in Boston and then one in Southern California. Okay. So I was like, snow or sun, and so the decision was made.
I'm glad you picked sun. I'm a sun person.
Me too. And so ultimately, I moved out there. I was in school for about 6 years between doing my 2 doctorate programs. So I have a doctorate in acupuncture and Chinese medicine and a doctor of chiropractic. And again, I'm just so blessed. I feel so fortunate that since I've come out, I've had the support of my community and in my school systems just to the nth degree. It's one of the things that I know played such a huge role in my health and getting to me where I am now, or getting me to where I am now. So loved my degrees and my experiences there. I had the opportunity to study abroad. I went to Taiwan twice and China once, and just an incredible experience. Amazing people. It's the first time I got to travel outside of the US, and
That's awesome.
further solidified, like, this idea that we're all just universally human and connected, and we have so much more in common than we don't. And so, yeah, I feel like in a way I was living my best life between just being able to fully express myself, come into my own. It took some time to unravel a lot of the first 22 years of my closeted life, but I did, and I think it's a continuing and ever evolving process too. So.
And now you're a practitioner here in San Antonio.
Yes.
So tell me a little bit about how this process works with your patients and the methods that you use, because I know them, because I am a patient. But I think it's very important how you really combine all the different elements that a person goes through. So please share that with us.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'm practicing mostly as a functional medicine practitioner these days. Functional medicine is a lens that we look at health and healing.
Okay.
And it's a little different than the conventional model because we're less interested, although we're sensitive to it, the disease to drug or disease to surgery model, that the conventional medicine model is really built around. And we look at whole person healing.
Okay.
So we kind of break it down. It's part of a biopsychosocial approach to healing.
Okay.
So bio meaning everything that lives in our physical world, our physiology.
Right.
Psycho, the mental, emotional parts of our life, which equally contribute to our physical health. I think there's a huge and underappreciated connection between what we experience in our mind, in our world, and how it manifests physically in our bodies. And then the social aspect, the importance of community and connection. I always say health is contagious, just like disease is. We catch it from the people around us living healthful lives as well. So, that's a huge way, or that's a lens that I look at delivering my kind of whole person treatment. So, it comes from my foundation in acupuncture and Chinese medicine, which is also a very holistic, kind of systems-oriented system of healing. And so, I started my first couple years out in Los Angeles.
Okay.
I practiced in in both the South Bay area and in West Hollywood. Kind of worked as a celebrity acupuncturist out there for some time. It was a fun experience, but
great.
I knew I always wanted to start my own practice, and that's what brought me home.
Okay.
And so when I came back, it opened the door for me to start pursuing more advanced training in functional medicine. So I did that while I was running my own acupuncture practice.
Okay.
And so I see patients through the acupuncture and Chinese medicine lens. But over the last 2 years now, really been switching over to the functional medicine.
And you got
aspect.
certified, right?
Mm-hmm.
Explain to me a little bit of how that works.
Yeah, so I'm trained through a few different organizations, but the first was the Institute for Functional Medicine.
Okay.
So they're kind of the premier organization that helps to standardize functional medicine education.
Okay.
I've been around for 25 or 30 years, and some of the big names in the functional medicine space are either educators or have come out of that system.
Got it.
So, and then other training programs too. I've worked with different mentors, including Dr. Dan Kalish and also Dr. Brandy Zachary with the Functional Medicine Academy. So, really getting and diving deeply into this functional medicine space because I see it as the future of healing. I don't use the word medicine just to not confuse, because I feel like someday we're going to all be able to come together.
Yeah.
We'll see that the healing experience is a lot more integrative and incorporates an understanding that it really takes a village to heal, especially chronic complex illness that we see today. Any questions there? Anything for some clarification before I keep?
Yeah, so I think something that oftentimes happens is that people really think of functional medicine as completely apart from medicine in general, and I think it's important that people know that they're not against each other.
Yes.
And that you're not like, oh, don't go see a doctor, don't go get care.
Right.
use this method instead. And I think it's very important to emphasize that it's a collaboration.
Yes, absolutely. It's meant to be an integrative gray area, you know, and I think we run away from gray areas as humans. You know, we could go back to the discussion on sexuality and life experiences a little bit, where it's just sometimes we're afraid of what we don't know. But you're exactly right. Functional medicine is an integrative approach. In fact, you can be any kind of health or healing degree, whether you're an MD, a DO, a DC, an Ayurvedic practitioner, a therapist, whatever, and you can still practice through the lens of functional medicine.
Okay.
So the package that is functional medicine is just looking at the intricate web of health and healing. You know, instead of, I kind of say, we oftentimes in the conventional medicine model, we live in symptom land, right?
Yeah.
We're looking for symptoms or diagnoses, these kind of end stage manifestations of dysfunction that's sometimes been there for, you know, years or even decades before it actually causes symptoms. You know, things like diabetes or high blood pressure and hypertension and heart disease. You know, these kinds of chronic complex issues are not as simple as just naming it and then matching it with a prescription. So one way I kind of like to illustrate this is, if we think of the conventional medicine model itself, it was born in the early 1900s when we discovered bacteria and antibiotics, and, you know, that was game changing for medicine and for healing. You know, our average lifespan and expectancy went from the mid 40s to the mid 70s in just I think a decade or so.
Right.
And that was because of the medical miracle at the time that was antibiotics. People weren't dying from sepsis or in childbirth as often and stuff like that. And so, you know, it revolutionized medicine, but now what it's done as we're living longer is it's created this space for chronic complex disease to kind of emerge. Okay. And it doesn't follow that same find that single bacteria under a microscope and pair it up with a medication, you know. So that's where I think functional medicine has a huge opportunity to impact the world of chronic disease and how we manage chronic disease, because it gives just as much weight to the conventional paradigm and the interventions when needed, but it also gives the same amount of weight to our lifestyle foundations and that biopsychosocial approach to healing. So,
which is kind of interesting that it's almost like full circle for you, because if we go back when you were misdiagnosed with bipolar disease, if this is something that would have been, if you would have done this instead, I don't think you would have had that misdiagnosis.
Oh.
You know, I think it wasn't like, oh, these are your symptoms, here, take this medicine. It would have been more of an in-depth look into, okay, what's really going on?
Right. Yeah, that's such a good point. And, you know, I think to kind of illustrate this with my own personal story is, you know, at that time in my life, yes, I was going through that major processing time with my sexuality, but it also translated into my physical health. I mean, I had horrible insomnia. I could not sleep at night. I had acid reflux to the point that swallowing water it would sometimes upset the acid reflux. And I was about 40 or 50 pounds overweight. And so, you know, now knowing what I know about functional medicine, I know that all of those things were related to what I was experiencing emotionally and mentally and even spiritually. You know, if we want to give some weight to the spiritual battle that kind of happens inside of us sometimes too. And so, you know, knowing what I know now, yes, absolutely, I wish I would have kind of known about functional medicine sooner. I did work with some healthcare practitioners at that time that helped me in a similar fashion, just a little bit different, but to recognize some of the holistic pieces that needed to come together. And that's what inspired me also to go into the acupuncture and chiropractic world. So, but yeah, if I'd have known then what I know now, that's that phrase.
And I think it's super important also and very helpful that you went through this already, so you know what it's like. And, you know, I think it's also, it gives you a lot of peace when you go to a practitioner or doctor and they can truly understand what you're going through. It's like you're the living testimony of that this method works, and that, I mean, you don't have to be a genius to just look at you and know that you are fine, you're great, you're doing awesome, you radiate this peace, you feel great, you feel accomplished. And I think it has to do not only with the fact that you're doing what your true calling is, which is practicing healing and helping others heal in different aspects of their life, but that you are fine with yourself. You finally accepted yourself, and you're living your best life, which is, I think, the goal for everybody. And then I'm assuming that's what you want for all of your patients.
Yeah, 100%. You know, I think that always catches some people off guard. You know, when we start an initial session with my functional medicine practice, is I'm spending an hour like learning with their life. I mean, learning about their life. And, you know, from childhood all the way up to present time, because you never know where in your health timeline something important happened. And we become a little insensitive to it sometimes. I think we have grown up in a paradigm that is just so familiar. It's, okay, I'm complaining of this. Well, what's the pill for that? Right. But there's so much that we can influence based on our unique histories. You know, kind of the same thing again. Where some of our experiences, and that's the same thing that really informs where on the dysfunction to full function spectrum we kind of lie. And so, you know, functional medicine looks at that full picture of your life and starts to draw patterns and ways to support, you know, your healing from the inside out, a little bit different than from the outside in. When we start to bring in these external things. And to highlight again, I mean, it's not an anti-conventional medicine approach. In fact, there's many MDs and nurse practitioners and PAs who practice through the lens of functional medicine as well. So it's, and it's important that you have both. I mean, conventional medicine is magnificent for emergencies and the things that we really need. But,
And what I was going to say is, I think it's important too also that it's a method that is really healing you, like you said, from the inside out, but it's something that you're not going to have to take a pill for the rest of your life, or you have to come see me once a month for the rest of your life. It's once you really get to the bottom of it and realize what's going on with your life, and you take care of those things, then it's forever. I mean, you're fine forever, as long as you keep up with taking care of yourself and really realizing what's going on and reading those red flags. And I think it's a method of life, you know, and I think it's important that people know that too.
Yeah, exactly. I think in some ways, a lot of the current news cycle has drawn a lot of awareness. You know, we're more connected than ever because of social media. The world gets a little smaller because of that. And so we're able to share these principles or these kinds of truths around, you know, true healing. And that's what we see in the news cycle with things like seed oils and, you know, this, that, and the other. It's easy to capture the wave of the trends as well. But what functional medicine really attempts to do is to sift through the noise out there in kind of the wellness world and the marketing spaces and really get back to just you, because each person really is truly unique, you know, and that's the beauty, is recognizing the uniqueness of each human person. I think this is like, we're seeing themes come out in this conversation, whether we were talking about the earlier story to now. But I think that's the thing that can drive the most profound and lasting change for my patients. And I've seen it, you know, happen. And a lot of this kind of chronic, complex stuff that it's really hard to put a name on or feel like I'm really getting better or feeling like my best self as well. When we start to identify some of those levers strategically and unique to them, it is what profoundly influences their health. And the behavior change component on the back end of that, I think, is one of the hardest things for people to understand, that that's a lot of what drives health and healing. It lives in our daily behaviors.
And what might work for me may not work for you. And I think that's important to know, that it's very personalized.
Exactly. Yeah, we can use, you know, information including that detailed health history all the way to things like advanced functional labs as well, which go into, you know, really deep, nitty-gritty detail of your chemistry, things that aren't tested on a conventional space because these functional tests are not looking for disease on the end stage. We're looking for dysfunction on the spectrum of dysfunction. So oftentimes it's tests that are a little bit more sensitive to that. Things that we're not labeling as disease, but rather how can we optimize your function so we can get insight into things like the microbiome or your digestive function beyond like a colonoscopy or something that would help to rule out really stark disease or pathology in a conventional space. So, and so much more. I mean, I get really, really nerdy. Again, another wonderful outlet for the nerdiness I had in high school and before, but it's
awesome.
kind of now functional medicine for me too.
That's great. That's great, Kenny. And I look at you now and I go back in time and I see perfect Kenny. And it really fills me up with joy, and I'm going to get emotional again. But it's great to see how awesome you're doing and all the great things that you're doing for our community and for your patients and for the world out there. I'm so sorry that you had to go through such a hard time. But I think, everything happens for a reason. I wish you wouldn't have had to go through that, but I think it's made you who you truly are. And now you can sit here and share your testimony and hopefully impact many, many lives, which I'm sure you will, and know that people that might be going through the same thing are not alone, and that they can get to where they really truly want and start for fulfilling their true passion and their true calling, because that's exactly what you're doing, and I couldn't be more proud and more happy for you. Really, it's amazing to see everything you've conquered, and it's just the beginning. I'm sure you're gonna keep conquering many things.
Thank you so much for that. I mean, just hearing that from you, again, like one of my longest friends. It's crazy to say, but it's so true. It means the world to kind of be here now compared to then, and have somebody kind of see me and my journey, and kudos to you for what you're doing here as well, which is to share with the world, I think, stories that can maybe help bridge those gaps of understanding, or those gaps that are founded maybe sometimes in just unfamiliarity or fear, for that sake alone. And so I'm incredibly grateful and supportive for the opportunity here that you presented for me, but also just on a wider scale. Know that you fostering the sharing of these stories, creating more human connections, and our global interconnectedness is just one of the most profound things that we can do for humanity. I truly believe that. So thank you for all that.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your story, for opening up. I know it's not easy, but thank you. I really appreciate it. Tell us where people can find you.
Yes. So probably online's the best. I run a virtual functional medicine space in Texas. I'm also licensed in California and Florida if anybody wants to be a patient in those other states. So, but reach me online. Instagram's a great way to do that, at Dr. Kenny Mittelstadt or Dr. Kenny Mittelstadt. My website, my blog, I've got some good free information, and then stay tuned for more educational opportunities too. I'll be hosting webinars, and also happy to be doing the weekly Wellness Wednesday segment with you.
Yes, that's a great collaboration that we started, and I think people have really enjoyed it, and I think it's super helpful. All the tips that you've been sharing on Wellness Wednesday have helped tremendously, so thank you for doing that.
Absolutely, it's my pleasure. Again, thank you for the platform. I think we need more of that in our social media and just connection world, is the hopeful messages and healing.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Kenny. Don't miss out on Wellness Wednesday, and thank you so much for joining us today. Don't miss the next episode of Momentos and Voices.